How y'all doing?
Yeah.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Hi, sir.
Good to see you.
Thanks, sir.
All right. How are you? How are you? Good, good.
I'm gonna still hang
Here
on.
you go, sir.
Patty Cowell. Nice to meet you. It's a pleasure. How you doing?
How are you, sir?
Teddy.
How's everything? Here.
Good. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Chief, how are you?
Good. How you doing? Good to see you. Bless you.
Hi, sir.
How are you?
Good, good, sir. How are you?
I'm good.
Right now, I apologize.
Sir, how are you?
Good.
What's that? We all made it. All made it. It's a big sigh. Yep. I get it.
But it was street legal. There's some,
This was you?
Hmm?
You bought it?
I have well, my son got into them. So, we always buy used junk, but I bought a '77 Honda XL 125. It's been 15 years old.
Okay.
And it is beat up. It is the most, but it always starts up.
Right back.
It is great. They used them in Afghanistan, actually, back in the 80s.
We learned something new about Scott. He's quite the Renaissance man between
Oh,
his
yeah.
cycling, his boating. I mean, it's just, there's no
And he is
boundaries.
mechanical.
No boundaries.
I just, I'm a gearhead, you know, I just.
We, good to get started, you think?
Yes, sir.
Let me call the meeting to order and certainly thank everybody for being here. Unfortunately, there's one person, as we know, that's not with us, unfortunately, and that's General Dominy. And I think we'll have a chance to speak to this at different meetings, but I certainly want to start with this one and acknowledge just how important he was to this board and this institute. He touched so many people in so many ways, and we'll have a chance to acknowledge him a couple times over the next couple of days. Before Chuck had passed, he and I had talked though about the fact he was not going to be able to attend the meeting, and I had asked Scott to actually come as a non-voting member, just because he'd been on the board as long as Chuck had, actually, so he'd bring that wealth of experience. And down the road, we'll name a permanent person to be on the executive committee. By statute, that person has to be a non-alum, and so again, I'm going to take my time. We've had time to do that process, but just wanted to introduce the fact that Scott's here just based on a conversation I had some time ago with the fact Chuck couldn't be here. So Scott, welcome.
Good, thank you.
Good to have you here. And I have talked to the new state attorney general about the situation we find ourselves in, and they're aware of it, and we're going to get some feedback at some point in terms of just how to think about the replacement process of the board in general. So I can speak to that at the nominating committee meeting. So with that, sorry to start on a solemn note, but I think unfortunately again, General Dominy touched so many people, not just at the institute, but across this country in so many ways. So it's good to never miss that moment to recognize them for that. So with that, let me then turn to the agenda. The first item of business is to approve the minutes of July 13th. Can I have a motion?
Read them and so moved.
Second?
Approved. Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, then they stand approved. I'll keep my comments very brief because we have a very full agenda. I know poor Cedric's got many papers and things to begin to hit the treetops on at this meeting. And we'll do as much of that in as open session as we can. I think one of the things we have to be very conscious of is be sure we don't touch on topics that either have a legal or a personnel implication. I think, Pat, you're gonna help us be sure that we stay on course with that as council, so appreciate that very much. We're kidding about the new portal, so again, hopefully as we get into this new academic year, there's gonna be some new things, I think, throughout the board process that people will enjoy, hopefully use, and I think Bill will have a little primer or, a chance to, have discussions with those that are a little challenged to get online, so I think you're gonna do that offline a little bit. You'll see I sent some materials out this morning, just on some things that I think across our respective desks. The intent was not to go through those materials, but I think over the course of today, tomorrow, either an open session or closed session, I think you'll hear the superintendent speak to some of the issues that were raised in those particular pieces of information. So unless there's any questions or anything else anyone wants to bring at the start, I'm just gonna turn things over to the superintendent. But everybody, any comments or questions from the group before I do? Cedric.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Welcome again, board members, back to VMI. We are off to a good start in this academic year, 23-24 academic year. This actually is my third academic year as superintendent, so entering into my third. Got a lot of things that we're gonna cover here over the next few days. Probably as packed a schedule of items to discuss as any time since I've been here. I think we'll try to breeze through as many things as we can. With respect to my discussions, in order to ensure that the appropriate weight can be put on those topics during committee meetings, so that the committee chairs can hear from the various different execs in those respective areas. But there's certainly a couple things that I want to highlight. So I think I would just start off by letting you know that what I plan to do, at least during the open portion of this executive committee meeting, is to really just kind of touch on the highlights of a couple of areas that you'll hear more in detail tomorrow, with respect to a couple different areas, really centered around an educational experience, and certainly an educational experience here at VMI, and some of the work that we've been doing with strategic plan. So we make an effort to close that out and get a document that points our way forward with respect to the work that's been done over the course of about a little over a year now. We'll talk a little bit about some areas in the budget as well. But starting out with matriculation, so the first thing I want to just highlight is where we ended up matriculation-wise. So on matriculation day, we had a total of 491 cadets that matriculated, one of which was a reappointment that showed up, I think, a couple of days later. But be that as it may, our number that we were tracking was 491, which exceeded our stated goal of 450 by a significant amount, and returned us back kind of in the area closer to 500, which we're sized for here at the Institute to deal with. It was a team effort. A lot of great work went on in a very, very short period of time by not only Joe Hagan, his admissions team, but Shannon Escom and the financial aid team, working in partnership with the alumni agencies to put in motion the Call to Duty scholarship or Call to Duty financial aid package that was put before a number of cadets and helped boost our out-of-state numbers pretty significantly. And I thought that was a good thing. We worked also with almost every stakeholder across the Institute that you could imagine, as well as our alumni, on making this thing happen, where we had cadets who were going home for hometown recruiting type events. We had new cadet recruiting events going on with our alum. We had faculty that were engaging students to call, particularly during that point in time when kids were asking questions about majors or concerned about the major that they had chosen and whether or not they were going to make VMI their final decision. So a lot of work went into that. And so we exceeded the goal of 450, and we are off to a great start as far as this campaign season for recruitment, because we now have Joe and his team set. Joe has the balance of the work that can be done from start to finish of the campaign, as opposed to when he came in, which was late September, early October timeframe. We've got some new tools that we've been able to transition to. The Common App being one of the primary ones. We are using different contract sources to go out and conduct outreach and to increase our inquiry pool of kids that have either demonstrated an interest in service in the military, going to a military college, specifically about VMI, on and on and on. So we've got a lot of work that's going on there. I think that right now, when it comes to our inquiry pool, last year we were somewhere around the 13,000 range, so we're already up to close to around 14,000, I believe, in terms of the inquiries.
Sorry,
13,000 plus.
13,000 total last year and 14,000 already this year.
Correct, correct. And I think the big boost, obviously, one of the big boosts in that, Hugh, has been the Common App, going to the Common App. Certainly allowed for the awareness, the awareness of what goes into that phone to be a lot wider and more, a lot wider. So we're off to a good start with that. We're gonna employ a lot of the same techniques this year that we did last year. Joe and his team have had an opportunity to bring folks together and just kind of talk about what went good, what didn't go as well as we would have liked, to kind of beef up our efforts this year. Joe has the balance of his team on board this year to include, I think, a couple of regional recruiters.
Yes.
That we've hired. So we've got a couple of regional recruiters that were hired in specific locations where they will go out to engage students at their schools, at college fairs, so on and so forth. And I think that will be helpful. That will be helpful to our efforts as well. So you'll hear more about that. Joe will have a brief that he will present in detail that talks about everything from the matriculation numbers to the quality of the student body for this fourth class, the diversity of this student body, class of RATs, and how we and he and his team employed the recruitment effort to get the numbers that we got. I don't know if anybody has any questions on that.
How's our retention going?
So retention, we're doing pretty well. I think I'd probably say we're about average right now, sitting somewhere around the average. I think we've lost about 25 cadets out of 491. So we're in good shape. Certainly not like we did 2 years ago where we lost a high number due to attrition. And I think we've kind of settled into where the normalcy of the academic year kicks in. And then we'll have to watch and see what happens over Thanksgiving as we get from now to Thanksgiving, and then from Thanksgiving to Christmas, and then who returns after winter furlough. But right now we're looking pretty good. There were a lot of things that were employed, even from the retention perspective, to allow us to bring in and make sure that anyone who decided that, you know, they thought VMI wasn't for them versus just having a hard day, just having a rough day, and want to make that decision that young people often make at a young age, where it has lifelong impact. We put in some retention controls that aided in that effort for us. So we'll be able to talk about that. Commandant will be able to talk about that as well in the military affairs. Some of the very, very specific things that not only the Commandant staff, but a whole team of folks did to help with retention.
How do we do with the upper classes?
Numeric wise, I don't have the specific numbers, Teddy, but I do know that we're sitting somewhere around 1550 to 1560, I believe, total core size. So I think that tracks with the numbers that we'd anticipated with the boost of the new RAD class. I had the numbers here somewhere, but I can probably get that for you for tomorrow. I'll have those numbers for you.
Senator, obviously obviously the Common App's a game changer.
Mhm.
Does it change the way the funnel starts to shape up though a little bit? Do you get more in the front,
Yeah.
the top, and so we got to be a little careful not to, as we watch the numbers flow
Yeah.
through, they're gonna be different this year percentage-wise than in past years.
It's gonna be hard to compare.
Yeah, that's why I guess it's gonna be a
Previous
little
years,
tricky,
yeah.
yeah.
Talk about that briefly, that's an important point, you're right, re-baselining where the entry to the funnel is gonna be really important, because it is it's a game changer.
Yeah.
And just that number on applications, we had a 4-year start to get to where we are with the target of about 18,000, then pretty much, but Common App is gonna be a game changer, but you gotta be careful with what's in there.
Yeah.
There's gonna be some junk in there as well, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, it doesn't get real till we start counting, applicants.
Right.
Whether it's early applicants or, after the, but what it does is it gives, Joe and his team an ability to at least conduct some type of outreach to that larger pool, because they've indicated one way or the other that they have something that might make them a good fit, for applying to decide to come to VMI. I think the big thing that I'll continue to foot stomp was the Call of Duty.
Right.
Scholarship and just where we landed on that, 100, the agreement from the agencies, was for 100, so about $1 million for 100, students that might come to VMI with a 3 or 4 year ROTC scholarship. I think we ended up somewhere around 81, and there were about another 3 or 4 that we were able to offer the equivalent of that Call to Duty scholarship, because they had extremely high academic credentials.
I think you said it before, that can't be a one-off thing. We've got to make that sort of part of our ongoing way that we're actually trying to connect with
Absolutely.
applicants.
Absolutely.
So if I can interject, course trend size at 1558
1558, so 15, okay, 15.
as of today.
That's precedent, okay, got it.
How does that, 81 full scholarships compare with prior years?
Well, I'd have to, I don't know the exact number, I'll get that for you, but I know particularly for out-of-state cadets, it really changed the demographics of what we had, with the out-of-state cadets. It caused us, for that RAC class, to be somewhere around, I think our number for in-state, where we were sitting with last year's 4 classes in barracks, somewhere around 63% in-state, 37 out-of-state international. For this particular class, we're somewhere around 55 to 57% in-state, with the balance being out-of-state cadets. So it certainly helped give us a boost, in a big way for out-of-state students and for those that are, interested in serving because they come to us with an ROTC scholarship. So, any other questions on that particular topic? I think, and Joe will talk about it in more detail, but I think again, in terms of the quality of the academic class, you'll see it's roughly about that number. 58% of those kids that matriculated, I think it's 58%, 59% were, came to us with a GPA of 3.5 or better, which, makes up the bulk of that class, with young people who did very well in high school, and we believe have the academic chops to succeed in. Strategic plan, we sent out, I think, Friday, a week before last Friday, we sent out the strategic plan for board members, to kind of take a look at, digest, certainly opportunity to provide any comments on. This brings us kind of full circle to all the work that went into the strategic plan, going as far back as, the work that, took place when I arrived with sensing sessions and development of one core, one VMI that, was undertaken. But more importantly, there were several other efforts that were done, to help begin the shaping of the strategic plan. So somewhere around March timeframe last year, there there was an initial planning guidance that was put out to the staff to begin to think about, how we wanted to strategically begin the development of a strategic plan based on some thoughts, and some conversations that I'd had about where we wanted to point the, institute in the future, leading out to our bicentennial, although the strategy really covers a 10-year period. The Forging 21st Leaders, Forging 21st Century Leaders really carves out a 10-year window. In addition to the work that was done by the team breaking up into different committees or groups led by institute execs, we also had the participation of the board president and John Adams as a board member on that group when we did the offsite that took place to begin to think about and talk about some of those ideas that were beginning to shape up as a part of the strategic plan. We brought on the performance management group out of the Wilder School at Virginia Commonwealth University to help facilitate the discussions that took place in the various different ideas that ultimately shaped up into those 5 initiatives that we talk about: preparing exceptional leaders, enhancing academic excellence, fostering esprit de corps, recruiting top cadets and boosting success, and delivering on 21st century infrastructure. There was also a survey that went out to the entirety of the VMI family. I think we got, at least according to institutional research lead rates, we got some very, very good responses. As a result of that survey, the vast majority of whom came from alumni, but nonetheless, we got a lot of good input from them. And then we began to shape the development of the document and go through the brief that took place with the board members somewhere around that last board meeting to begin to kind of articulate how the strategy was shaping up. And then we began to do the writing and development built on those initiatives, built on the goals and objectives that had been identified. I did take the time to farm the document out to some former senior leaders, some mentors, both familiar with VMI, both part of VMI as well as others. Got some real good feedback from them, made the adjustments. And so that document that you all saw on that Friday is a result of all that work. And so I'll be prepared to give a detailed brief and hopefully facilitate a discussion of the strategic plan with a recommendation to the board on where we think our next steps need to be.
And again, the setting for that is tomorrow at lunch, I think, right?
Correct,
Same kind of
correct.
setting we had last time, just
Yes.
a smaller group in the Preston Library.
Yes, and I'll kind of hit it way top and during my opening remarks again, something along the lines of what I just said, but yeah, the briefing is intended to kind of highlight what is contained in the strategic plan. Comments on that? Okay. Dallas Clark will talk about the budget and where we ended up in the last FY, and talk about a few things as it pertains to the fact that the General Assembly now, it looks like they've finalized a budget that is ready to go forward for the governor's signature. For the FY, the fiscal year that we just finished, we did finish with a balanced budget. In fact, we finished with a surplus of about 800, close to 900K. That will carry over into this next year, and Dallas will be able to go into detail in terms of all the things that went into ensuring that we came in with a balanced budget or surplus as we did. It positions us much better in this 23-24 cycle to begin to take a look at the impact and or whether or not there's going to be a need to recommend anything about increasing tuition and fees for this next academic year. And it allows us to continue our effort to do the belt tightening that I was talking about to make sure we bring things into into, balance with cost controls. There's a piece in there also that, Jim Miller will lead the discussion both in athletic committee, and he'll team with Dallas during the open session, superintendent's agenda items to talk about the athletic budget, and how we're beginning to look at that. I will tell you that, number one, I still wanna speak about, athletics from an operational sense. What is it that we want VMI athletics to mean, for those student athletes that come to, the institute? What type of experience do we want them to have? I think what you'll find is that over the years, this is not the first time a conversation about athletics and athletic budget, has occurred. I think that obviously the, last year with the low enroll exacerbated, the funding shortfall. But the reality is there were certain headwinds that were coming our way anyway, similar to the headwinds that took place, several years ago, when we began to make the shift from the operational dollars to raising scholarship. And so the experience, I believe, for our cadet athletes, ought to be one where we position ourselves with the best opportunity to compete to win. That doesn't mean that, we're ever going to be in any conference that we're in, funded operationally or through scholarships, at the very, very top of the conference. But I think that where we are right now, ninth in the Southern Conference, puts us in a position where we have been and continue to be woefully underfunded. If you do a comparison to our sports, our club sports, you'll notice that our club sports are funded, and this includes club sports and probably other club activities, are funded as well or better than anybody that we compete against. And so naturally, we do pretty well when it comes to club sports competing for rugby, club sports competing for basketball, club sports competing for powerlifting, on and on and on. We are very competitive, against other schools that have the equivalent of a club activity, that goes on. I think these young folks that come to VMI, we recruit them, we give them a great opportunity. In some cases, $250,000 is being invested in their education. I don't think that people will see a disparity between the academic performance of our cadets, versus the rest of the Corps. They actually perform quite well academically. And so I think that, as we begin to have the discussion, we ought to center the discussion on what is it that we want the cadet experience, for our NCAA athletes to be, as we look ahead and as we begin to talk about what it's gonna take, or what the next steps are for, the strategic plan.
So this will be part of the discussion tomorrow morning by Jim. I think it sounds like some, with some, it's not like you're referring to some data, it sounds like, so there'll be some visuals we can look at to sort of see what you
Sure.
just described, it sounds like.
The more in-depth discussion will be during the athletic affairs or the athletic committee meeting. But yeah, Jim is prepared and Dallas are prepared, to talk, about some things in the opening session. Dallas certainly has, all kinds of charts and data, in terms of where we ended up. And he's gonna go probably a deep dive down into the academic, or the audit, finance, and planning committee as well.
Yeah, just as a reminder, the Institute did a great job controlling costs this past year, and that surplus is really, commendable, given what we were looking at back in the fall. Going forward, the outlook, has improved, for a couple of reasons. One, because we're starting at a better position, thanks to this past year. Two, the higher enrollment, sooner than we expected. And I think just some really good work on the team's part. So the deep cut into the fund surplus that we were talking about back in April is not nearly as deep. But, that's the good news, the overall picture is strong. The athletic picture, we identified in the spring as a real problem, and it seems to have gotten worse, not better. And things are different now, and, we need to understand why, what's changed if you go back in the 9 years before this past one, we had surpluses in 5 of the 9 years in athletics. And the largest deficit we had was just under 100,000. And those deficits have now grown to $1 million plus, and looking at it exceeding that by quite a bit going forward. So the first step is understanding what's changed, what's different now, and what do we do about it.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
I think, we'll be able to lay that out. I think part of it will be an understanding, appreciation of what happened back in those days, and I describe it as this, and this comes from, my background, in the Army with, planning and programming and budget. You know, you can have, and that's why I talked about my philosophy of how is it that we want to present ourselves when it comes to VMI's role within, one of the 3 legs of the stool, which is the athletic component. And certainly the athletic component is not all about, Division I athletics, it's about, the athletic regimen that all of our cadets tend to have. But again, it's about the experience, it's about what experience you want. If you're gonna operate an athletic program and you're gonna manage the budget, right, that's the direction of the, that's given to, the athletic department, manage the budget, then you're gonna start doing things like, when most athletic programs are operating where they travel in buses, we're gonna be in vans. When, most athletic programs have a reasonable, pregame meal for their student athletes, we're sending kids to eat McDonald's. When most athletic programs are putting 2 student athletes in a room where there are 2 beds, we're putting 4 or 5 student athletes in a room because, the budget won't allow for them to have 2 in a room where, and these are some of the things that, you know, I recall experiencing when I was a student athlete, you know. When I was a student athlete here, at least among the basketball budget, I suspect with the football budget as well, we tried to make sure that the experience of the student athletes was such that, where it should be for the Division I athletic program. So again, yeah, I think it's about just having an appreciation and understanding of how you operationalize the budget. Jim will show you some numbers that will show you that over time, our spending power has eroded. It's not gone up, it's not kept up with the pace of inflation, and so, that kind of helps set the stage for the start point where we are. But I think it'll be an enlightening conversation.
Good.
Transgender policies and procedures, we'll talk about that. The team has done a lot of work, to put together a resolution for board consideration, that lays out, some of the main features of what a policy might look like. I think if you recall during the ExCom meeting back in the summer, we talked about 2 things. We talked about a couple of policies that existed presently that, they really didn't address, or we had not made a determination whether they needed to address anything about the admittance of the transgender cadet. Really, as we looked at it, it was really about, okay, how should we be treating all cadets, right? And if a cadet happens to be, someone who identifies as transgender, should that matter with respect to the policy? So you've got, GO 13, you've got GO 16, which the team has looked at, to try to ensure that the language is updated, to address transgender and cisgender?
Actually, it's non-binary.
Non-binary. Okay, so transgender and non-binary. And so there would be adjustments to, those two policies. Neither one of these policies have come before me for approval, right? I have seen, the resolution that we'll put before the board. And then, there's another policy, that is in development, which spells out, when, where, how identification occurs, for a particular, transgender cadet. And we wanna make sure that that follows suit with both federal and state laws. And we also wanna make sure that it addresses, not only the provisions that cover the transgender cadet, but also other cadets as well. And then the second would be a set of, standard operating procedures on, where you'll live, what facilities you'll use, what sports team you might play on, a whole range of things. So, there's a series of documents, two of which are already existing policies. One would be a new policy, and the third would be a set of standard operating procedures, after we've gotten the board adoption on the resolution.
General, do we have any guidelines from the service academies?
We have asked the service academies, what their policies look like. I don't remember what the service academies, I know, Colonel Bogart, who was the lead for the development of, and the review of the policies, he took on the lead. I know that conversation has occurred, also with senior military colleges. I think, Norwich has a very, very robust, policy, and I'm not sure that the Citadel has one that's very robust, if I remember correctly.
So they're taking them on a case-by-case basis.
Correct.
Some decided
Correct.
not to even establish a policy, just go by case-by-case. And so just another update, this, you have the two policies and then a standard operating procedure.
Right.
Is the other side, that's the
Yeah.
policy and the procedures.
Okay.
Tom, we talked back in April about, the full board having time to review this, and then the full board, voting to approve policies. How is a resolution different from approving policies and procedures?
Yeah, so there's and Pat, if you chime in, by all means chime in.
Sure.
I think that over time, it has happened a couple of different ways, if you look at the board bylaws. When you talk about, the marriage policy and, the policy on whether or not you had a child, while you were a cadet at VMI, both of those, policies were shaped by a resolution that was signed by the board. In this particular instance, the resolution essentially has a set of preambles by which the board defines certain things and then turns to the superintendent and says, therefore go and put together a policy that meets these criteria, okay? And so we took that approach, in development of the resolution. As I said, the policies that exist, there's two policies that exist, 13 and 16. And then there's a set of, standard operating procedures. So that's the way that we approach the development of this particular policy, considered consistent with, the marriage and family policies that already exist and how they were shaped and developed. Is there anything that you can add that I missed?
Yeah, it's clearly within the board's purview to formulate policies. A couple different ways it can do it. The board can either pass a resolution directing the superintendent to draft a policy, and then the board could review it and approve it. The board could draft its own policy, say this is our policy and this is what we want to approve, and act as a board and put that policy in place. So there's a number of different ways to do it. The way the marriage and pregnancy was done was there was a resolution, there were certain parameters in there that the board directed the superintendent and his staff to formulate a policy consistent with those parameters. and then it was done that way.
Okay.
Again, there's a number of different ways it
Yeah.
can be done, the board could draft its own policy, that's.
We
certainly
talked
doable.
about approving the policy on this. To me, it doesn't matter whether it's a policy or a resolution, but it's gotta be all the details. We need to get involved in all of this. For a couple reasons. One, we need to be sure we get it right. But secondly, General, you need the support of the board on this. You need this to be a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
And if there are parts of it that we don't agree with, that's not good. It's not good for our community. We need to be able to turn to alumni and everybody else and say, we're behind this, 100%. We agreed to it, we spent the proper time discussing it. And this isn't something that was pulled on anybody, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
So I
Can I
think
point-
it's important that
Can I just point out that,
we get into the detail, and whether that's in a resolution or policy, it doesn't matter to me as long as we approve all the detail.
to move things along, you could pass a resolution directing that a draft policy put together with the caveat that it be approved by the board before it's finally implemented as a general order.
Is there a variation of that though, rather than involve the full board, that the executive committee could be the one that picks up on the basis of when that thing is finalized?
You could put it in a resolution, having the executive committee.
Again, I'll tell you, you share with me, which I agree with completely, use this committee more often, and I'm gonna try to do so. Because, again, there can be, frankly, limits trying to bring a full board together on something such as, I agree with you, by the way, the intent here is very much to be sure something is approved that everyone can buy into. It shows support for the acts and policies of the administration, very much wanna do that. I'm just wondering out loud whether we can do that in a slightly different version that just engages this group.
Teddy, can I ask you this, are you focused more on whether we should admit transgender students, or if, once that happens, where they bill it, what's the daily routine, and things like that? Are you interested in the daily SOP of how to?
Yes, the latter.
The latter,
Of
okay.
your question.
Okay.
All the details.
All the details of where they're gonna bill it, where they're gonna use the bathroom, and that's your concern.
All the kind
Sport
of things-
participation.
Sports
All
participation.
the kind of things that can be controversial. I think we as a board need to vet them, and we need to stand behind whatever decisions that we come up with.
For the daily routine of
Yeah.
transgender care, okay.
Yeah. I don't think we wanna face alumni or anybody else and say, well, nobody asked us.
Well, Tom, maybe from a practical standpoint, what you're saying is, as you hash through this, it would be full board approval, but I'm not a fan of more committees, but, you know, if you wanna take it off in a committee that puts this together and, you know, several from the executive committee could be on it, it just, I think what you're suggesting, it might be walking through a plowed field and trying to get this all worked out with the entire board, as opposed to having a committee that puts it together, then brings it to the board. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a two-step process, it's building up on passive. The first step is a resolution, which has some clarity about what the plan is, the policy is gonna look like, but also then delegates to the executive committee, the oversight of that ultimate policy, and then the executive committee can approve that policy. That resolution would have to be obviously approved by the full board. So it still has board approval, but it's delegating to a smaller group as we get into the specifics of the policy.
That's one way to do it, that's how the marriage and pregnancy policy, I think, was put together.
Right.
Again, it's within your authority to just go ahead and draft your own policy if you want.
I don't wanna do that, I'm actually,
Okay.
I'm not suggesting that. So I was taking some options off the table that you gave us, because I'm trying to follow something that frankly was used before, and does engage the board, but engages it as we've always, this committee set up specifically for purposes like things like this.
It just sounds different from what we agreed to in April as to how we.
I don't think we agreed to anything. I think we listened, you said very much you think this should be approved by the board. I don't think we had a good discussion about that. I think we observed, you know, your preferences, and I think we're coming up with something that I think is very consistent with past practices, and does keep this board very involved in the specifics of what's been brought forward, but doesn't engage the full board. Not that we should, you know, we're trying not to engage them, but I'm just saying, this is committees established for those particular reasons.
It's my understanding we don't have a transgender cadet that we know of.
We don't have an openly identified transgender cadet.
Okay.
Yes, I think if you talk to some of the cadets at barracks, they will probably tell you there may be one or two that aren't open.
Okay, but policy wise, it's likely that we've got, the balance of this year to work through this.
I agree.
Okay, I think that gives us plenty of time to review anything at the full board. Gus,
So-
you look like
If I could just
you
offer.
disagreed with something I said, or you had some thoughts?
I was having a little bit of a nervous reaction of having the full board discuss all the details
No,
of
that's
the
correct.
day-to-day routine, but I haven't seen a draft policy or resolution. Is
So
that
there was
in
a-
the material?
There was a resolution that was, when they posted in the dashboard.
No, the commandant has that, it's been,
The resolution?
yes.
Okay.
So it's coming through the Cadet Military Affairs Committee,
Okay.
and so I know that it's still being changed and updated, so.
I'm not suggesting that the full board spends hours working through the details of it, but I am suggesting that the full board looks at the full range of the day-to-day and says, yes, we agree with everything with this. That's all.
So
Is there a medical component to this?
there will be.
Right.
There will be. I mean, for example, you have to have a conversation about whether or not upon matriculation, if there's medical processes and procedures that a cadet is expected to go through, when should that occur, when would it be allowed to occur? So that's something that you certainly would have to work through to identify in our policy that way. When you go to a point of appointment to a student who might be transgender, you say, this is our policy, right? You won't be able, for example, you won't be able to begin treatment after you've matriculated, or you won't be able to do it until after you have the rat lines over, whatever the policy says. You need to be able to be upfront with, any prospect that might identify as transgender so that they know, that these are the accommodations, if you will, that will be afforded to them if they decide to come to VMI, so that we maximize their opportunity to get the experience of VMI. I would just tell you that, I think the one thing I would point out, again, is that, number one, a lot of work was done on a committee a few years back, several years back before I arrived, on 2018.
Yes, sir.
On the development of a policy, which I think it more or less got put on the shelf. And so there's work that's gone in, the work that's been done thus far started with kind of pulling that stuff off the shelf, reassembling a committee that had a lot of folks in the chaplain, operations, legal, academics, the doc, admissions, the commandant, to begin to shape things. So there's two components again. There's two existing general orders, right? Where it's just a modification of language, right? Which again, I haven't seen the final language and I haven't reviewed it as well. And then I believe, Chief, there's a third policy, separate policy that is being drafted as well, based on the work that's being done here. And then there's a standard operating procedure. Typically, standard operating procedures, right, deal with the day-to-day. And so the question is, how much does the board want to get involved into the day-to-day? Certainly, the resolution, the adjustments to two existing policies, and if there's the shaping of a third policy specific to transgender or bisexual or anything like that, we can bring it before the board. I think what we have prepared at this particular juncture for the commandant to talk about is the resolution.
So if I may add, the
Yep.
Commonwealth put out a model policy to identify, how would a transgender student identify themselves? What's the proper documentation?
Right.
We have nothing on the books as such.
Right.
And that's what the Commonwealth has created, so I believe Boney has modeled the third policy
Yeah.
based on that. The other piece of this too, if I may just bring your attention to it, is that the issue of time, I don't think there's a lot of time here, and I'll say this, I'll tell you why. We had an incident where a student presented for open house, and not the one that was actually coming, this was another one, and they were placed in a room. There's a possibility that for an open house, there may be a student coming, who is transgender or transitioning. What do we do with that particular student for these events that are one-off, if you will? And so there is some, I don't wanna say urgency, but I think that we have to be cognizant of those events where a particular student or someone else comes on post, that we have to accommodate.
Thoughts on process?
Well, the resolution sounds like the first step, and then I like your suggestion of having a draft policy reviewed by the executive committee, so we can hotspot or troubleshoot whatever this committee at a high level thinks might be problematic. Before we get to the board. That's all for a process.
Yeah, I share your objective. We want to be sure that there's gonna be lots of people who have a view on all of this. And so I'm not trying to shortcut the process, but I just think it's cumbersome if we go to the full board. And I think and it sounds like from what Chief and others have said, we need to be able to work to their pace, actually.
I'm assuming that the administration is working through the details. It's fine if they'd like to share that with the executive committee to have some debate back and forth. I think that's great. I think ultimately though, the full board needs to see all the details. And they need to check off on it. Just, if nothing else, to give General Wynn's cover. So nobody can say that this was yours, not mine. That, you know, this is all of us in this. It's not often a big policy comes along like marriage or children or transgender. Let's all be in this together.
I would, again, I know you're doing this, but, I plow the ground that's been plowed before. I would imagine West Point, Air Force Academy.
Yep.
Academy, SOPs in place for building, toileting, athletic endeavors, and let's try to draft all that. If one size doesn't fit all, we're not the service, we're not the Department of Defense, but I would suggest we'll get some good guidance there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so I think if it's okay with the board or the XCOM, the plan was to have the commandant discuss this during the, committee, military affairs, the resolution. And then we can take signal from the committee chair and or the committee about things that might be necessary in the resolution. Okay, and then we can set a date either at the next board meeting or sooner, to coordinate and bring the XCOM together to then have a discussion about the policies, the specific policies. And by that time, I will have seen the policies, I will have reviewed the policies, I will have had an opportunity to hear from the staff, the extent to which staff coordination, and staff synchronization is going on. And then I can present it to the board for you to review, deliberate, discuss, debate, disapprove, approve.
I hope not the latter pieces, because where this all takes some time, right?
Sure.
Everybody comfortable with that? But what,
I think we need to, take Colonel Young's point though. I don't think we have all the time in the world.
no, we don't, that's why I'm trying to figure out how do we keep pace with what's actually
Squared
really
away,
happening.
given the groundwork that's already been done, and the policies are in place, other places, let's not wait until,
Yeah, but
the spring board meeting.
I agree with you, Gussie, but what we do for open houses of kids that are not cadets is different. And we ought to knock that one out right quick.
Well, I was
Separate
thinking about last spring, you know, we were looking at somebody coming in and it was summer transition program and I wasn't clear on what.
Right.
There is one more point to this, I think is very important, that the cadets themselves have organized around this issue. So that there are cadets who are LGBTQIA plus here, one post. And so they've taken it upon themselves to talk this through. We've engaged them, get their input on this, which is very important because they know the day-to-day tenor, pace of the barracks. And so they've been quite helpful. So small group will continue to engage with the staff on this particular subject.
I think that's a good idea, and I think it's a good idea to be revisited as whatever, a regular interval.
Okay. Alright. So we'll,
So not to get too granular, we end up with an executive committee meeting sometime between now and the end of the year to go through a policy draft. And then, I'm just asking out loud, I wanna get really specific, cause everyone's got these great ideas, and so
Sure.
now we're gonna figure out how to put this into the operational side of it. When do you need a board approval then, roughly, to be able to be in a good position relative to what's likely to unfold here, and potentially, around the first of the year?
I would say that, in my view, at the latest, I think we probably should have something because the recruitment process is ongoing. I certainly believe that by no later than the January board meeting.
That's what I was gonna say, that's what I'm trying.
But we could certainly have, again, at your, decision, we could have a session of the XCOM where, assuming the resolution is worked sufficiently where it's satisfactory to the board or not, but we bring the XCOM together at some point between now and January where you all could either fine tune or finish off the resolution, and then we begin to show you what the work has been done on the policies.
The intent was being in a position then to get a seek approval, regular January meeting.
Correct.
Cause if it slips beyond that, then we're into a real practical
Correct.
problem.
Correct, because now we're essentially doing what we did last
Right.
year, which was, we did appoint a cadet, who had identified, he'd come to an open house and identified, as transgender. But as we move towards summer, there's STP considerations that would have to be made. If it turns out that a transgender cadet is applying and is appointed, there's STP considerations that would have to be made. And then there's, matriculation, considerations that would have to be made for next year. I think the one clarifying point that I wanna make sure I understand is the board satisfied with looking at resolution and policies, or resolution, policies, and standard operating procedures?
Well, the resolution, which we're gonna present tomorrow, is to have it approve the institute forming a policy and a procedure.
Correct.
I would suggest that the policy and the procedure come to this committee for
Okay.
review
Got
and
it.
input and oversight.
Got it.
I think we need to see all of it.
Okay. Got it. Got that, chief?
Yes, sir.
Alright. Okay,
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable to a degree, but if I'm with it, but I think as long as this committee, when it actually sits down and provides feedback, is then prepared to endorse it to the board. Do you know what I'm saying? So it isn't, we don't start with a clean piece of paper once we go to board, and then it drifts all the way into the spring.
It doesn't go to the board until we collectively have
But
said
you
it's ready
and
to
everyone
go to
else is
the board.
prepared to then say that we're recommending this to the board.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to get.
Like any committee.
it's not a clean sheet of paper. We
No,
won't
no,
present
no,
to the
no,
board a clean sheet and
absolutely
start
not.
trying to make sausage.
Exactly.
In a committee.
That's all I wanted to be clear on.
And XCOM.
It comes in the form of a recommendation from a committee.
Right.
Or
This is not the board, that's right.
Okay.
So can I, it's the board's intention to approve a resolution at this meeting?
Simply, I would think so, simply
Yeah.
authorizing,
Yeah.
I don't know if you need that kind of authorization,
What do
but
we need it for?
I'm not sure we did. Do you need a resolution? Because the administration can certainly start SOPs and.
Yeah.
We've
or
already
any general
asked for
order
it.
without a
Okay.
resolution from the board.
We
so I
asked
don't
for it
really
in
know
the
why.
spring.
Well, the only thing is that the resolution provides some guidance as to what you want them to do with the policy. If you don't wanna do that, that's fine too.
Such
What do you
as-
mean guidance?
Certain parameters, whatever you think needs to be in the policy, you can give them that guidance up front as far as what you want, and it's in the draft resolution, I think that Colonel Bogart has. If you take a look at it, if you don't wanna, certainly, you could just direct them to do the policy with your approval, you could do that.
It follows the pattern of previous efforts for certain key policies. There's already a draft. My recommendation would be that the board at least be made aware of what the draft looks like and how it's constructed as a resolution. And then it would spell out, again, as Pat said, it spells out very particular areas with respect to the development of a policy that the board is saying, make sure the policy addresses this, make sure the policy takes this into account, make sure the policy, covers this particular area.
To the extent that the board speaks through its resolutions, I mean, that's, you know, that would be a good.
We'll see this for the first time.
And with all the confusion around it, I don't think it belongs going to the Cadet Military Affairs Committee. Scott and I are both on, I think it should be discussed by the executive committee, John?
I do.
Yeah.
I just, this.
Seems like the wrong
Well, we-
place for it.
I would support that move. It's not the merits, you know, it's,
Yeah.
meeting with Bogart, he mentioned it, but he was not planning to bring that resolution to his briefing tomorrow. He did discuss it with me, so.
Okay.
He might, you know, what he went over with me, so.
Okay.
Maybe just.
Alright, let me clarify, I've got less than 24 hours to clarify the disconnect and.
And it might be just
and just
what he
know
was
how you
showing
all-
me today, so.
Is it possible to circulate that to this committee?
Can we go?
Fact, why don't we just go get it?
Yeah, no, I mean, let's.
And he did, Bogart did discuss it.
Right.
What are we
Oh,
talking?
yes.
I was not under the impression he was gonna brief it tomorrow, but that,
Knowing all the stages, we could probably
I see.
cut through some things.
Okay.
Okay,
Alright.
let's move on, we'll come back to it.
Personnel updates, first of all, in the room is, Colonel Alyssa Aspen, through a selection process, through a committee that was centered around, the selection and the hiring of the new Inspector General Title IX Coordinator. Alyssa has been selected to be our Inspector General Title IX Coordinator. She's already hit the ground running. She just came back from what you were, a year-long, deployment or from,
Naval War College.
Naval War College, okay, so she's a Naval War College graduate. And she's not new to the institute, she used to work down in auxiliary services, and so she's gonna be our new Title IX coordinator. The chief, and so that announcement is already going out as well. Chief Diversity Officer, we expect to name that soon. That committee was formed, and had the selection of a number of candidates as well. And, we are looking at, announcing that as well. Meanwhile, Brianna Williams is has been fulfilling the role of the acting chief diversity officer since the departure of Jamaica Love. So we have 4 positions I would highlight, as open positions. One being the chief diversity officer, which was posted on the 15th of August. And then, it came down on the 22nd. The interviews are ongoing. As a matter of fact, I think I have, an interview with, Brianna here, this week. And then Title IX, I mentioned that as well, that went out on the 18th of May, and was closed on the 25th of August, and that's filled, by Alyssa. The notification went out, I think it was last week, and she started work on the 25th of August, when she returned back from her year-long at the War College. The other position we have is Chief Information Officer, that went out on the 5th of April, coincided with Wes Robinson's, retirement after 40-plus years here at the Institute. We had a very, very robust candidate pool that, the committee had to whittle down. Unfortunately, the top two candidates, that were offered the position, later declined after a series of negotiations that took place. Last week, we had a third candidate that was in, and then we have one internal candidate who, interviews will be taking place here over the next week or two, to be able to close that position. And it was reposted as a result of the previous two, candidates that were offered the position, but they later turned it down.
So is the declinations a common issue like compensation, or is it specific to each individual?
It's specific to each individual. One definitely had some specific demands, demands that he wanted. He was the #1 candidate, I believe. And when those things couldn't be met, he turned it down. And I'm talking, he wanted everything from the rank he would wear, the compensation, moving expenses, so on and so forth. And there was certainly a willingness to negotiate within a certain range, but he was way outside of that range, even though I think through the process, it was well understood what kind of the salary ranges, compensation ranges, that it wasn't something that we sprung on him at the last minute. It was something that I think he knew. But when it came down to the final stages of it, he had a lot of demands that he made. The second one, I think when we went out to him, if I recall correctly, he decided that something had occurred within his family situation that no longer made him a suitable candidate at this particular time. And then so we reopened it, and we got two candidates, one internal and one external. The external one was just interviewed last week, and came here on post, and then the internal one will be interviewed in the next couple of weeks. And then the fourth position is Executive Assistant, Executive Officer to the Superintendent. That position was posted on August. We've got about 13 candidates, but I think, there had to be some work on rewriting the CV, the
Job description.
job description for, the position, to make sure that the candidate pool that we had selected actually fits, the job description for what we want. And so we'll be looking at, working through that. Chief, I think, is making sure that he holds people accountable on that particular. So those are kind of the four key positions. I don't know that there's any other one. I will tell you that, in the discussion, and this is something that I've had conversations with, the board president, is the idea, because of the demands of the work on the executive officer, previous executive officer, fulfilled two roles. He was executive officer, executive assistant to the superintendent. He also fulfilled the role as board secretary. And as you might know, the demands on his time leading up to the board and post-board, with all the work that has to be done, literally causes, for, him having to disengage from his or her role and duties as the executive officer. And with the added number of, committee meetings and board meetings, it's created an additional demand. So what I decided to do, was split the two positions, right? And we're gonna put together an announcement, that will go out for board secretary, separate from the executive officer. Now, the board secretary will be a part of the executive office, of the superintendent, and there will be other duties as assigned, but,
Sir, correction on that.
Okay.
The, Board of Visitors actually appoints the board secretary.
Correct.
So there won't be an announcement
Absolutely.
about that. Historically, it's been the executive assistant to the superintendent, that's the name of the role within our regulations. But that will be, again, it could be anyone within the institute within a role that the BOV appoints as a secretary.
Alright. Well, now, will that result in them being dual headed? Will we have somebody who's dual headed?
Yes, sir, probably more than likely, because again, it's not a role that we would actually, post as a job opening, but it's an appointment by the BOV. And again, historically, it's been the executive assistant
Right.
to the superintendent.
Right.
Will this be a head count increase?
If it's an individual that's already on the staff, I don't believe it would be a headcount increase. If it were to be a case where, the board president decided that no one was satisfactory to him to fulfill that role, then I'm assuming we could go out and we could advertise for such a person. Is that possible?
Not according to the bylaws.
Okay.
It would have to be changed.
It would have to be
I don't think
changed.
we've had this problem historically,
Okay.
at least as I can tell.
Okay.
But say for instance, just theoretically, I could be appointed as BOV secretary.
Right.
In my current role, so it's a net zero sum,
Right.
if you will, in terms of
Correct.
head count. However, if you have another role, that's a second role actually,
Right.
so rather than being one. Now, with that being said, the executive officers we've changed the name to, that fills the same role potentially, adding the BOV secretary to that, that's not the intent,
Yeah.
nor is that in that job description.
So we gotta do some work on that. We gotta do some work on that, to just, so I'll put some brain trust together and we'll figure out something and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, sounds good.
With a recommendation. Okay. The other topic is, about the Cadet Newspaper. So Cadet Newspaper, per conversations with board president, with respect to, the awards and the announcements that went out, the decision was made to make a determination on the set of facts surrounding, the announcement of the VPA awards and the subsequent, contact questions that took place with the VPA, the Cardinal News, and the Washington Post. I think during the last XCOM, I mentioned words to the effect of no, outreach or no direct communication initiated by the Institute. And I wanna make sure it's clear, that number one, it was well understood through my conversations with, our communications and marketing director, that there was initiation of a conversation point to point between the Institute and the VPA. Okay, with respect to media outlets, the Washington Post, and the Cardinal News, my understanding is that communications between those two entities was as a result of them contacting the Institute about stories that they were working on. Okay, so I wanna make sure that that's clear, because if I indicated that there was no outreach whatsoever by the Institute, that would be incorrect. Okay, the Institute, through its communications and marketing, did reach out to the VPA on the subject of, the award pertaining to the Cadet Counseling Center article. So that leads us to the tools that I have available internal to the Institute. The tools that I have available, certainly to conduct fact-finding or investigations center around, HR for HR matters, Title IX coordinator, and legal counsel. And as it is, we understand, the position of the Attorney General's office with respect to legal counsel involvement, which leaves me with HR and Title IX. And so, the decision that I've made is that, the IG, Lieutenant Colonel Asfan, will conduct a fact finding, on the events surrounding, the award, and the subsequent queries and outreach that took place on, the series of awards that were given to the Cadet Newspaper. And one of her main tasks is to construct a timeline, of the events that happened surrounding and who was involved, and how all of those things occurred. And then, to do a review to make a determination on whether or not it can be substantiated that policies or procedures were violated or broken. Okay, right now, I think the timeline that Alyssa is working under, is an expectation that somewhere around the end of this month, she will have, a report, that will lay out those things that I just mentioned. And, she will be able to prepare or provide a briefing, to me and to the board about, what occurred, in that particular area.
Good. My expectation would be that briefing would occur in closed session, given the HR and legal ramifications involved.
That's what I'm expecting.
I'm not so sure you, I'm curious about the investigation, or, sorry, fact-finding effort here. You and I talked about this last week, and, I do think that there should be a concern around an appearance of conflict of interest. If someone on your staff is looking at impropriety on your staff, someone's new to the job and reporting to you,
Okay.
and you and I have clearly had different views on all of this. I'll be shocked if there's any determination that policies and procedures were broken here. Which is partly you.
Prejudgment, I mean, why don't we wait and see what we get?
Okay.
And let's see, and these are legal and personnel issues with people's livelihoods at stake that ought to be taken up in closed session. And if we wanna do that today, I think that would be appropriate.
I know a whole lot about this.
Well, let's hear it back in closed session, because, I
And
think
a
I'd like
lot
to
of
hear
this
what you know.
is not personnel related. It's, communications policy
I'd
related.
love to hear about it in closed session. We've received letters that suggest there have been violations of civil rights and freedom of speech rights, legal in nature. And there have been discussions about personnel actions or inactions which put people's livelihoods at stake. And I'd love to hear what you know, because I know this much of what you know, it sounds like, Teddy, so let's talk about that today in closed session if you want.
That may I defer to you, I mean, is.
Yeah, these matters appear to be more appropriate for closed session.
Okay.
Some, but not all. I can't in good faith say that the conversations that we need to have around communications policy here, are closed session appropriate. I don't know where in the legal realm that fits. I don't think it fits.
A
in
general
closed session.
discussion regarding communications policy, I think, would be something for open session. To the
Right.
extent that it crosses over into a personnel matter, or a disciplinary matter, or a legal matter, then that's probably more appropriate for closed session.
So you're saying there's elements that belong in both?
Depends what you're gonna say, Teddy.
Okay.
I think
If it's a discussion about policy, I think that's okay for open session. If it's a discussion specific to an ongoing investigation regarding an HR matter or a disciplinary matter, then probably, if you're getting into the facts, I think it's more appropriate for closed session. That's my opinion.
Okay, how about the broad topic of the relationship between the administration and the Cadet Newspaper?
As long as it doesn't delve into one of those areas, you know, an ongoing existing investigation or a personnel matter, you're probably okay.
Flip it the other way. If it doesn't go into those things, are we all right covering that in closed session? I think the answer is no.
Yeah, that's right. We pop back out of closed session into open session as we begin, I think, to start to get into things which frankly are inappropriate for closed session. So we could easily find ourselves flip-flopping, Teddy. So I think the other question is, when's the right time for this? Is it better to wait for the work to be done that the superintendent just indicated? Or is it better now but that's, you know, you've got in your own mind some of the things you wanna speak to so I'm not sure, is it now or is it when we have the full the full analysis that the superintendent referred to?
Well, we seem to just keep kicking this
No,
down the road.
we can't, I mean, I've said publicly, that we need to get this behind us and find a way to deal with this in a way that all parties can feel good about things, and that may be utopia, not possible, but that's gotta be the objective, and so, no, I've said many times, we've gotta get this behind us. This is just lingering on way too long,
Yeah.
and it's a distraction from a lot of the other things that we know are pretty important issues for the Institute to be facing today, so the intent is not to kick this down the road, no, it's gotta be dealt with, but dealt with in a way that both the closed open session phenomena is dealt with properly, but also that the work that I think the superintendent referred to, it can be kind of completed so that we've got all the pieces when we sit down and talk, and realize we could be flip-flopping back and forth between open and closed sessions. It seems cumbersome, but you know, that may be, Pat, what we end up having to do, right? Because you know, it's hard to cordon this off in a way that frankly, before you get into it, you know how it's gonna emerge. And I think like you said, if you know, there's information there, we all need to know about it. So, you know, it's, I don't think anyone, you know, doesn't wanna have the full play, right?
The framework by which we pursued the fact finding, was based on a couple statements, and email traffic, to include a petition, to include a letter that was written to State Attorney General, and to, Secretary of Education, suggesting that the Institute and or certain individuals in the Institute had done something that was a violation of law. And so that is why we have produced, or we're going down the road of the fact finding, as Alyssa has begun to put together the statement of the investigatory path that she intends to take. I think it's been bracketed in such a way where that's kind of the reason why we're doing it. Those were the statements that were made, that I've seen that indicate, that part of, at least the part that I've committed to going down is to find out whether or not policies or regulations or laws are violated. So,
General, when they ask, is there something written out for this kind of a situation that we can access that's online? Like, what is our standard operating procedure for when there's allegations of impropriety on the part of a staff member or a faculty member, or like, do we have a written policy that we're following?
This should be an AMP.
So there are certain policies, Alyssa, that you are referencing, both in faculty handbook, AMP handbook, institute policies, general orders that speak to the conduct of members that are part of our faculty and staff.
So we would
Those
have that,
will be
that's
highlighted.
all in place.
Those will be
We're just
highlighted in the
following that
fact
procedure, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
You know, Inspector General is a tough position. It's a sensitive position, and you are asked to review actions of faculty and staff every time an event comes to your office, and so to accuse yourself every time there's a faculty and staff involved isn't workable. But we understand the IG's position, and you're right, they've got policies and procedures to follow. I suppose we could look at that manual if we need to, I don't know if we've ever needed to before, but.
I
Well, it would
think
be
that-
helpful for me to know, like, we have something in place and we're following the steps,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
Pat, did anything I brought up at the last executive committee cross over into closed session material?
To the extent that we were talking about personnel matters with regard to individuals who may or may not have, violated policies, et cetera, possibly.
I don't believe I brought up the possibility of violating policies and procedures.
Okay, I'd have to look at, I'd have to go back and look at the transcript or the tape, but,
Well, I recall saying and having a concern that we were getting there, and I said, well, I did think it was appropriate for closed session at the last meeting, and so if you're talking about anything, so I'd love us to have a closed session discussion about what your concerns are about personnel and ramifications of the letters we received from the Alumni Alliance for Freedom of Speech, and let's do that in closed session.
My concerns don't relate to those letters. My concerns relate to, the broader issues around, the communication strategy here that we pursued over the summer with the Cadet Newspaper. That
Can I,
brought what I believe is a lot of discredit on VMI.
can I make a suggestion? To the extent that the IG is doing an investigation, certain facts are going to come out in the closed session. Once the board is able to get its arms around those facts and understand what actually occurred or did not occur, maybe that would then set the groundwork for any policy discussion that you wanna have moving forward as to what you could change or not change.
That's what I was referring to, if possible, because then we have all, in theory, all the information in front of us. Right.
Without discussing personalities in open session.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
So if it's okay with the board, we'll hold to the timeline, that we're working under right now in terms of, Alyssa finishing the investigation, as you might, know. She's often dealing with and juggling a number of investigations. And so we kind of had to prioritize, through a discussion between she and I, to prioritize her work, but, we'll work towards getting this done by the end of the month, and I'll reach out to you, about, the need to bring the ex-con together and have a discussion on, what the facts show with respect to, this whole thing, Cadet Newspaper and the like.
Okay, that's very good, I mean, it's cumbersome, I understand, but.
Tom, I told you and General Wentz after our discussion in early August that I wasn't satisfied that we were handling this, in an appropriate way. And that I believe that the whole board needs some understanding of what the issues are here. And I still believe that. We don't need to debate it ad infinitum. If you wanna say, after I've had my opportunity to share some of this, that, this is what's being looked into and we'll have more information, that's fine. But to kick this down the road and not have any conversation on it after, I've lost count, but at least 7 articles now written on this, and, a timeline that, I saw today online in the issue of the Cadet that came out today, that, was very thorough. I can't see not having any discussion on this. There's been tons of articles, none of them favorable to BMI. It's taken an enormous amount of my time and probably your time as well.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it,
can't
And
start.
there's too much danger in
Yeah.
being in a public session and live streaming about people and their livelihoods and claims of
There's almost nothing I have to say in closed session. I'm not out for anybody's head here. I'm very concerned about.
And you want the board to hear it,
I do.
and I do too, so let's do it in closed session.
I can't,
Why not?
because the law doesn't allow it.
Well, let's see where we go. Let's start on the deciding on the air of caution, where people's livelihoods and legal claims are at stake, and then
So
pop out.
let's,
Into open session if we need to.
let's turn it all off,
No, we're good.
and then let's possibly pop back out of closed session and turn it back on for the world to see. That's what you're saying?
I don't know what you have to say, Patty, but I know what it.
What I was trying to do, Teddy, as you're talking, is think about what you wanna do, can we have it dovetail with the bigger process of fact gathering, actually? So that it's a more balanced discussion of everything we know at the time, and back to your point, I wonder if what we're saying, actually, as it relates to this, they're completely different issues, but with the Cadet Newspaper and what we've agreed to on transgender policy, do I need to give an executive committee report to the board, so the board knows what the executive committee does? I don't know that we've actually done that in the past, it's never been done, but maybe that's an indication that, these things are very much, on our minds, we spend time talking about them. There is a process in both of those cases as to how we're gonna proceed, so again, we're not shaking this under the carpet at all, but it's an acknowledgement that we're not ready to go prime time yet, perhaps with the full discussion. That's coming soon, and that's another alternative. And again, I hear what you're saying, but I think the other aspect of this is, when does everybody have the full body of information? Both the information being developed by the Institute, the information that you have, and that's why I'm trying to push this a little bit into a process where when we open that door, we have every board member has all the information. And I don't wanna keep kicking the can down the road, believe me, you're right.
That's
Probably
what
you and
we're
I
doing.
spend an
That's
awful.
exactly what we're doing.
No, I see it differently. We're saying when we have the discussion, we have a wholesome one with all information. And we go back and forth.
I shared a timeline with you and General Lance. That's what I wanna talk about, and nobody's refuted that, my facts.
Well, I'm not sure whether you're in a position to do that yet or not, based on the fact gathering you have, but I'm gonna guess not yet.
I would just say that, the timeline that I've seen, number one, has been turned over to the IG to build into the factual timeline. I would say that the timeline certainly does not include, it's number one, it does not include certainly, certain email traffic that, would have come from, the folks that were involved in everything pertaining to the Cadet Counseling Center article when that came out, and the impact that that had all the way up to, the outreach to the VPA, and then, the request for information, and the information that was provided to the other two, to the two media publications. I think the other thing is, as I recall, there was specific mention about, the status of certain individuals with respect to if they were found to have contributed to it. So there was certainly a part of the discussion that was centered around the idea, that, some type of administrative action would be carried out, on, certain individuals if the timeline, was validated. So I'm not prepared to go through the whole thing. I think that as she begins to construct the timeline, she can show, where gaps in that timeline might exist and what were the actions, reaction, and counteraction associated with it, is what I would offer. So.
And I guess I'm offering, Teddy, is a wholesome report on my behalf to what the executive committee just talked about, both as it relates to this as well as the transgender issue, and as well as if there's anything else, just so people understand the full board, and in the public session, open session, that we've got a timeline, really a real time, not the timeline about the process, but a timeline for how we're gonna bring this to a discussion, a well-informed discussion and a balanced discussion.
So
And it's not measured in months, it's measured as, I think you're proposing at the end of this month.
End of this month.
And we need to come back together again,
Who's we?
this executive committee. After the superintendent has had a chance to digest that information, then I think the first stop is this committee, if others agree.
So you're saying sometime in October, we'll get back together and see?
Probably early if I'm not trying to put words in your mouth.
The
sir.
timeline that we're working on and the suspense that we've discussed between myself and all this is the end of this month. So if it's the 30th, then we will be talking about something within hopefully the first or second week within October.
And all I'm trying to do is ensure that when we have this discussion, there's the full breadth of the things that you've uncovered, the things that Alicia's uncovered, and we therefore have the full balance of information.
But you won't let me raise this issue with the board.
I didn't say, no, you're a board member, you can raise anything you like. I'm trying to build a process though, where it can be wholesome, balanced, and complete. And if you wanna supplement my comments about the report I give on the executive committee's discussion around this in open session, please, I'd invite you to do so. And, so I'm just presenting that as another alternative, because otherwise we're gonna end up with chunkiness to the discussion. And no one wants this behind us more than you and me and this gentleman.
I think all it takes is a hearing on this, a voicing of it with the board, and I'm done.
Yeah. Well, again, look to others. I'm not trying to.
And I don't know what you're gonna tell the board that the executive committee did here, other than agree not to talk about it now.
Well, that's not what we did. I
No.
mean, we raised an issue. I think the consensus around the board was that if this is gonna even potentially have implications for a personnel matter, for potentially somebody's livelihood, that it would be best to proceed cautiously by discussing in closed session, and if some of those things that you wanted to discuss are not appropriate for closed session,
Right.
we will come back up. General Wynn's provided us a timeline, that his process is gonna go through, and we are there.
Yeah.
I don't wanna say we agreed to that, but that's what.
Well, no, that's what I was proposing.
So
That's
that's-
actually, because again,
that's what I think happened.
again, we achieve nothing if we don't get this. I completely agree. I understand.
Right.
That's it.
So let's-
But I'm also trying to be sure that
Let's
when
shine some light on it.
but shine light on the
In
complete
closed
session.
Teddy,
I
you
can't
want,
be.
well, Teddy,
You're
you are
asking me to
concerned
talk
about
in
things
closed-
that happened over the summer and prior, with respect to the VPA awards. Inherently, that involves conduct of individuals, and you're concerned about that. And I'm concerned about your concerns, and I wanna hear them. But they involve individuals, and they involve legalities. And I wanna hear about them in robust fashion, so we can debate them, talk about them as a board, where we should in closed session, because they involve individuals and individual actions and claims of illegalities. And I hate to be saying something like that in public session, but, even right here, but that's what you said, and that's what I wanna talk about. And let's do that in a responsible fashion. I don't know why you think it has to be an open session. I really don't.
Cause
Let's
I've
start
got,
in closed session and see what your concerns are, because they inherently involve individual actions that occur.
even then, I start talking about things in closed session that aren't appropriate for closed session, then what happens?
Well, we'll get advice from our counsel, but if they involve individual actions that could lead to personnel decisions and or legal claims involving violations of free speech rights, I don't think you'll be in violation of the closed session.
Well,
I really don't.
again, I'm not the expert here, but when we have the IG's report, isn't that by definition in closed session?
Yeah, because it's pertaining to a personnel matter.
So actually, I would, and I don't know what you're gonna say, Teddy, but it easily could be that your commentary is woven into that piece, which in effect is protected as part of a closed session discussion. We're not trying to hide things, by the way, I wanna be sure the camera understands. We're not trying to hide things from the open session. We're trying to be, obviously, careful to be sure that we have all the information as a board, and that we're conscious of the fact that there are things that do have personnel and legal implications. That's all that we're trying to accomplish here. And most importantly, as we said, try to get this behind us in a way that everyone can feel that we've done our work and that we can move ahead with a clear mind. I don't know how else to do it other than that.
Let's see how tomorrow goes.
Yeah.
Hugh, I know what I have to say, there's nothing free speech related in it. separate issues that I'm not involved in.
You're concerned about certain actions.
Yes.
Yes, and
I'm
people conduct
I'm
actions.
concerned about a strategy, a communication strategy that VMI pursued over the summer to take their issues with the Cadet Newspaper public. And I'm concerned with the fallout from that we've seen with all these articles. That's what I'm concerned
Well,
about.
why don't you have a discussion with Pat? Offline and talk about what should or shouldn't be in public session. But it sounds to me like those are concerns about individual actions. Yes.
So, everything that happens here is individual action.
Well, you sound like you have a concern about violations of the law or of personnel decisions that were
No,
inappropriate.
I think it was very poor strategy on our part. I've asked what the strategy was, what the outcome was, and I've heard two different things on that. Neither one of which I believe are a good explanation. But,
Maybe, that's a good suggestion. Teddy, offline, do you mind just talking to Tad and just talk about the kind
I'll
of
be
thing?
happy to talk.
Because I think that we're not trying to violate any openness or issues associated with closed open sessions. Even when you talk to Pat, my big worry though is that then the board doesn't have all the context for a subsequent discussion. They've got the materials that you share, but then we don't have the feedback from the IG. So that's my worry.
So based on that, nobody would ever bring an issue up to the board without it being investigated first.
No, I don't think so. No, I'm not saying that. I
If,
think that's a big leap.
I don't think so. I think I'm raising an issue here. I'm making the
Well,
full
you have
board
to-
aware of
You
the
have to
issue
look at the
that's been
context
going
of
on
this
all
issue,
summer.
you have to look at the context of this issue with pending litigation, allegations of freedom of speech.
Pending litigation.
Well, yeah, there's suits with certain elements of the Cadet Newspaper. Again, I think there's all sorts of branches to
I'm
this
not
actually.
aware of any litigation.
You wanna review, no, we're not gonna review our pending litigation, so,
Not an open session.
that's right. And don't wordsmith it,
Sorry?
don't wordsmith it.
Okay.
I'm trying to make a point that actually trying to figure out a way off of this particular position we found ourselves in. And trying to balance both the need to know, but also the need to know the comprehensive nature of all the pieces. And also give you an avenue to share your perspective, because as you said, we deeply care about the things that you're seeing and hearing. Just wanna be sure that they're done in the right forum, and that we can therefore have a comprehensive discussion, not just a series of comments from you without actually some other work that the IG is going through. But again, I think where we left is, let's talk to Pat about the kinds of things you may wanna bring up. And then, look, this is all about, despite what some people say, I think we run a good process of governance with very clear transparency. And, if these issues that you allude to they're real, I get it, I understand. And, we need to get to the bottom of them, but let's have all the pieces if possible. And no one's gonna try to hide under the open versus closed session.
Well, I can't talk about this in closed session.
Okay, but I think we left it with, we're going in circular motion here, I mean, right? I think if you spend some time with Pat, the two of you reach an understanding of whether or not, do you feel, Pat, that these are things that do open us up in terms of exposures in a way that we shouldn't be opening up the institute?
And it's hard to say, Teddy, because we don't know what it is you're going to say or what you want to say, but to the extent, I think Hugh framed it very well, and that to the extent there's an intersection here between an ongoing investigation regarding, personal matter and actions taken by personnel of VMI, which may or may have not been in violation of policies, laws, et cetera, then I think any statement of yours that touches upon that, I think is appropriate for closed session. If you wanna make a statement regarding a policy or something that VMI is doing in general without touching upon the personnel matter, then it's probably more appropriate for open session. But again, I mean, if you wanted to have a discussion offline and we could talk about what you wanna say.
Well, the other thing too is I don't think, Cedric, the Institute would be prepared to react to it because,
You
your
don't
work
need
is still
to
underway.
React later to it.
that's coming through in my comments, because that's certainly not the intention.
Okay.
I think we do wanna go into closed session at some point here before this is ended, so I'll just touch on two things. Number one, during military affairs, I'll talk about, discipline. There's a set of guidance that I've given him, for this year, similar to guidance that I've given in years prior about, the focus for 23 and 24. Again, the focus is centered on good order and discipline on the core reestablishment standards. Focusing on, the illegal illicit use of, drugs, i.e. marijuana for the most part, to focus on that in terms of to what degree that may be happening in the barracks and among our cadet corps. We certainly have procedures in place that are intended to make sure that is minimized, mitigated, or doesn't exist, but that's a focus area because of a couple of instances where we have had cadets who tested positive for drugs. We've had, in recent years, a cadet who overdosed and died as a result of the use of illegal substances. Sex on post, sex in the barracks, is another area to focus on. Alcohol use on post, alcohol use in the barracks and or, other places on post is a focus area. And then, contact time, various groups of club sports, NCAA doing common activities together, maximize that to the degree that we can. My expectations to them as I communicated, number one, I've had this conversation not only with the commandant, but also the core leaders, right? To build VMI spirit and pride. Be surprised to know that, in a conversation last year, I just simply asked how many cadets understand what the spirit of VMI is and can sing the spirit of VMI. You're surprised that many of them, don't, and among this class, I asked the same thing, and, surprisingly, they say, hey, we didn't learn it. They were the COVID class predominantly, that started off in COVID and ended up, their rat line in COVID. But again, I challenge them to build the spirit of VMI, build the sense of pride in the institute. Focus on and understand the code of cadet, make sure that our actions are consistent with the code of cadet. And then, all post conduct should be within established limits and rules. And then the commandant, needs to ensure that the corps is operating by the book. Blue book, all the rainbow books, if you will, blue book, white book, green book, and red book. That they're operating by the book in terms of what happens and what occurs to make sure that cadet governance and or the things that fall under the jurisdiction of the commandant and his staff are being addressed and taken care of. That's that topic. And then the last is on strategic communications during external relations. Bill Wyatt will brief the communication plan for the institute. It's our effort this year to broaden it compared to where we were last year, where the focus was primarily on that recruiting class and getting that recruiting class delivered at 450 for hire. That ends my comments, and subject to any comments or questions by the members of the executive committee.
Other questions or comments from the superintendent report?
I have one that General, I raised with you last week.
Sure.
The three of y'all have been on the board, since we first started the diversity training. That's I think it's a true statement that
Certainly for me. Yeah.
My question for y'all and for the general, I was looking over the training for this year. And the training for the rats is that social identity wheel exercise where you pick a topic, whether it's race or socioeconomic or sexual preference, and you tell the guys in the room, those of you that are, I'm
Sure.
generalizing, but those of you that are rich, go to that corner, those of you who identify
Lester had a meeting, this summer, in August.
Yeah.
That I'm gonna understand that is not, the Four Corners training is not what you'll be doing this.
Crossing the line in Four Corners won't be taught. There is this social identity wheel, which is, again, these curated products or these techniques, right? This particular one comes from the University of Michigan, right? It's something that has been researched and studied for over 30 years, right? And it has to do with social identity. In the development of the training, and granted, as was brought up during the Inclusive Excellence subcommittee meeting, we've taken the approach this year to evolve the program where what is the training and how it's conducted for RATs is gonna be different than thirds, seconds, and first. So it was brought out and everybody understood that the social identity piece was something that through work and collaboration with the cadet facilitators, all of whom come out of the Cadet Equity Association, that is a long-standing body that's existed here, they recommended that that particular type of exercise be brought back in. And in fact, they also, because they were a very, very basic set of questions that were asked as a part of that effort, they were the ones, the cadets were the ones, because of kind of the nature of what goes on in barracks, that they encourage things like NCAA status is a part of this kind of social identity that you identify yourself. High academic achiever, right? And then they introduced the one and asked that it be brought back in about your gender identity, your sexual orientation, your gender identity. Cadets recommended that. So the intent is for the RATs, because again, these young people come from high school. Their interactions are typically confined to a social group of one or maybe multiple particular type, but certainly one particular type of social group. And all of a sudden you come to VMI, right? And now you're interacting with all kinds of different social, gender, race, religion, different groups. And so that's the approach that we've taken this year with that particular training.
They also, they indicated that there would be, which was applauded, I think it's a good idea, the training for the RATs is gonna be different
Yeah.
than for upper classmen. Each year it's gonna change, and the presentation at the meeting in August, was principally held by the cadet trainers. And how they're gonna tier that, so,
Well,
I didn't drill down on it.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
but
the document here from the committee meeting has the categories, the sexual
Correct.
orientation, race, political views, socioeconomic status, NCAA status, gender, and so on. And it says that, facilitators will set up signs with the various identity categories around the room. Students will move to the sign that best fits their answer. It's what we did before.
And that's troubling to you.
Well, I said, I wasn't here the year we did that, but I know that after the year that we had this, we felt obliged to put a subcommittee of the board in place for training, because we didn't get it right the first go around.
it was a specific Four Corners training where they, you presented with a question, and you either agree, disagree, strongly agree, or strongly disagree. And, which meant you were encouraged to physically stand up and move to one of those positions,
Yeah.
which, you know, is not encouraged type of training for new beginning training. Maybe for more mature, not the Four Corners, but what maybe for upperclassmen, that wasn't my impression.
I think,
Maybe doing
yeah.
the rats.
I think the survey,
I see.
I think the survey results indicated that, among the younger classes, rats, it was not as problematic, it wasn't problematic, it was the upper classes that felt like, because in that first year, we did crossing the line, we did, 4 corners for all the classes. And if I recall correctly, the surveys that were taken after that, the upper classes were the ones that felt like, the training was not very useful to them and what they would, and that's the large part of why we've adjusted, the training. Again, we're talking about teaching style. I don't know if pedagogy fits this or what, Chief, but we're talking about teaching methods that, have been developed in the universities, other colleges and universities, and have been around for a long time, been studied by social scientists, been studied by a full range of people. So, I mean, you know, part of the first year of being here is about learning to lead. First, to learn to lead oneself, and so the identification of who you are and who you're around is very important to learn how to lead and how to be a good follower first.
Okay, the training for the third, seconds, and first, I think looks great.
Okay?
I really like it, but we're putting in place something that my understanding was caused a lot of problems the first year, such that we had to put a subcommittee of the board in to address training only.
But again,
I'm
again-
raising the issue because.
Again, I think the perception of the problem, was, at least as I recall,
Was
from
it-
the survey,
wasn't a
was for the
problem with
upper
the rats.
classes, right?
Maybe, Senator, if we could, let's just, it's page 240 of the materials actually for that committee. Let's ask Brianna to talk about how that rad class program has evolved
Sure.
from its start to today. And today that gets to your question, actually. And because if we've gone back to something that we started with that frankly, you know, maybe wasn't as effective as it should be, you know, let's talk that through. But
Some of this this isn't that bad.
No,
Academic
sure.
major.
More problematic was, there was a broader range of series of questions.
Yeah.
In the
Right.
first iteration, I mean, a very, very broad range. of
Unanswerable.
series.
But-
Yeah.
But
questions that would be-
I'm just raising.
Yeah, no, I think, that's what I'm
Good.
taking that, and I think there's a deliverable, which is
Yeah.
tomorrow at the committee meeting, specifically talk to this, cause there's a
Okay.
page there to it, and how's it
I'm glad
evolved?
you pointed out, Teddy.
And so I'll get with Lester also
Sure.
tonight.
And sir, if I may add, I think there's an important difference that was missed here. To mention 2 things. One is through the lens of the leadership development program.
Right.
There's a line closely with that. 2, the categories, I think were the issue initially. Categories were selected by the cadets themselves.
This time
But-
around,
Yes, sir.
absolutely.
And that's what I
Define
think,
those
how this has evolved, I think,
Yeah.
as chief would be a
Rather
good thing,
than-
cause it's just a
But
stagnant
if they've
shop.
ended up being the same categories, then we've got an issue, so.
Well, at least for the cadets, they selected what they.
I would ask that, we take some institutional memory here, cause I'm looking at the makeup of the committee, and most of them weren't here then, so. Y'all go back and scratch your heads, and was this a problem?
I don't recall exactly, what I recall is that the RADS survey was really high,
Pretty
like
good.
they
Right.
really
Very
liked it. And there was concern about that, like, you know, forcing people to, you know, be uncomfortable, what have you.
State
And I
your
think they
sexual
modified it.
preference, yeah.
And then I think there was some pushback last year that said, well, this isn't effective, like, we need to change it. So I think there's been an evolution. Unfortunately, I've never been on the committee, so I can't recall exactly what that was, but I'm sure it's all, we have all the material.
I just was gonna give everybody a heads up
I
tomorrow
will,
to be sure.
I'll
we-
make sure that Brianna, I'll,
There's a lot here as
she can
usual,
speak to
but-
the
yeah,
evolution.
yeah.
She can speak to the evolution and again, how, the efforts that, she's made to adjust the training for the RADS is through this, heavy amount of discussion with, Dave Gray and his team over in the CLE. And again, trying to present a framework around, brand new high school student coming into a leadership environment. How do you learn to lead yourself? What do you need to know about yourself? And what do you need to know about the individuals around you that, you will also have to, work, in aspects of the issue.
It's important to do it right.
Sure.
Yep, yep.
Maybe,
And the reality of it is we're probably validating
Shine
that.
some light on it.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I can get it for tomorrow, but you're absolutely right, yeah. Gene Scott.
The other thing is, last year, y'all put out a, excuse me, a schedule of when the training was gonna be, and invited the board
Sure.
to come if
Sure.
you could. I attended the RAP training last year, and I'm glad I did. So, if y'all
Sure,
could do that
we can do that.
again, I think that would be helpful.
We can do it pretty much on Fridays, cause that's superintendent's time.
They mentioned that in the committee,
Yeah.
but it's open to all board members.
Yep.
So, hey,
Thank you.
Okay. That's all I had for that, and I do still intend to go into
I
closed session.
think, if nothing else, yes, I think we should,
Okay.
just for.
At least one topic.
Yeah, exactly, so you'll have to bear with me as I review my narrative here, actually. At this time, it's 5:59. I entertain a motion that the board go into a closed meeting to discuss, number one, matters related to the employment, assignment, appointment, or performance of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the public body, and evaluation of the performance of departments or schools of public institutions of higher education pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711A1, relating to the review of the superintendent's performance objectives and to special staff and the evaluation of specific departmental operations. Secondly, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711A7 pertaining to actual or probable litigation of the institute. And three, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to VA Code Section 2.2-3711A2. And I offer, can somebody move?
Well done.
Next, so moved. Pretty sure I'm gonna have it memorized actually, which will be great. I have a motion and a second. Anybody opposed? Good, then we're hearing now, then we're